Welcome, lovely humans. Today we are going to cover AI and its impacts on education, discussing the opportunities and challenges that this technology brings. And we're doing this with a focus on ChatGPT and its impact in the classroom. This video is part of an ongoing series I'm making about AI in education on behalf of Gearing Up, an education outreach organization based at the University of British Columbia. So before we dive too deep into the opportunities and challenges, I'd like to quickly explain what AI is. AI stands for Artificial Intelligence, and it's a way of using computers to solve problems that would normally take a human to solve. Two of the most common types of AI are called predictive AI and generative AI. Both are first trained by giving them a large dataset, for example, a bunch of images of animals, and then using machine learning to find patterns in that data. But where predictive AI can use the model created during training to categorize new data, for example, it might predict that a given image contains a cat, generative AI uses its understanding to generate new data based on some kind of prompt, where you might give it the word cat and it would generate the image of a cat. Generative AI has been making a big splash lately, because in the last year or so it has started to match or exceed human capabilities in many different domains. It's being applied across various fields, from generating images to synthesizing music or voices, designing products, and engaging in scientific discovery. But for the educational world, its ability to generate text has caused some concern, because of how much writing is used for assignments and assessment. In order to understand the impacts this technology is going to have on the world, and on education specifically, it's useful to understand a little bit about how it works. A lot of the time, people will talk about ChatGPT and say, nobody knows how it works, and that's not entirely true. Or at least, it's misleading. It's kind of like how you might say, no one knows how quantum mechanics works. That's true, we don't have a complete understanding of how these systems work, but we do have people who still understand quite a bit about them, and we can still use them to solve problems. So with that, here are some of the approaches that something like ChatGPT uses in order to understand and produce language in the form of text. Note that the following applies specifically to text generation, and you would take a different approach for something like images. The first of these tools is the use of large datasets and statistics. ChatGPT specifically was trained on an absurdly large amount of data, 570 gigabytes to be exact. This dataset encompassed a wide variety of sources, including books, articles, websites, and other publicly available text from the internet. This would take a human over 4 years to read if they were reading continuously without any breaks. This is why we call ChatGPT a large language model. We were looking at this dataset, the model learns how likely different word pairings are, and so it can start to predict which words are most likely to come next in a given sentence. If we take the sentence, the cat sat on the, it would be able to predict that a word like mat would be very likely to come next. Another word like floor might also be quite likely. And a word like cloud would probably not be very likely, but would still be possible. You can think of this as being a little bit similar to the way that your phone keyboard tries to predict the next word that you're going to type into it. But there's an additional piece here that your phone doesn't have that adds a lot of capability. It can also look back at past words and rate how much it needs to pay attention to each individual word when guessing the next one. So in this example, the word cat might be the most important, with the other words being less so. And it can do this not just across a single sentence, but across multiple paragraphs even, which is why it can stay on topic even when writing longer responses. Another piece something like ChatGPT uses is the idea of relatedness. Oversimplifying things a lot, we've figured out ways to represent language as a set of numbers, and we can represent those numbers on a graph. If we take the sentence, the cat sat on the mat, we could take those numbers and put them on the graph like this. Then, if we take a similar sentence like the kitten laid on the cushion and also put it on our graph, it should end up quite close to our first sentence because they are quite similar in their meaning, despite sharing almost no identical words. Another sentence, like the dog chased the stick, is somewhat similar. It's still about animals doing things, but it's not very similar, so it might get placed a little further away. And finally, a sentence such as, I enjoy eating chocolate, is just completely unrelated, and it would get placed somewhere totally different. ChatGPT would learn these related meanings through the use of statistics and lots of examples. And this is how ChatGPT can answer your questions. It can find the information which is similar in meaning. All of this has been oversimplified, mostly because I'm showing it to you in 2 dimensions instead of the several thousand that ChatGPT uses. For obvious reasons, I can't show this to you in 4,000 dimensions, but the idea here is the same. Finally, the last piece is human feedback. When you use ChatGPT, you'll see the ability to leave a thumbs up or down whenever you get a response. This is called reinforcement learning, and it's similar to how we train animals, where you might give a dog a treat when it does something you want it to, and give it a spray from a water bottle when it does something that it's not supposed to. With machines, this works a little differently. It's more like the relatedness idea from the last slide, where it'll change its response to be closer to the desired outputs and further away from the undesired ones. These three aspects of statistics, relatedness, and feedback are what make up the intelligence of ChatGPT. Now, one frequent criticism of ChatGPT is that it's basically just an extremely powerful autocomplete software, and there isn't anything in there that resembles genuine understanding of the words that it's saying. I believe there may be more to it than that, and the extent of its understanding is an open question. My reason for thinking this is a concept called emergence. Emergence is a property of complex systems, where the result of the system becomes greater than the sum of its parts. This is often found in biological systems in particular, and in fact, my favorite example of emergence is a biological cell. A cell has this extremely interesting property of being alive and engaging in adaptive and self-replicating behaviors. But if you break a cell apart into its individual pieces, such as the cell wall, the DNA, or each other organelle, alone, each of these things seems to be dead. And you would think that dead plus dead should equal dead, but instead it equals alive. And we see this phenomena where new properties emerge in a system at all levels of nature, down from subatomic particles to the synchronized flashing of fireflies. And it seems like many of the more complex machine learning algorithms also contain emergent properties. They are able to exhibit behavior and knowledge which were not contained within the original training data. For example, these systems are able to develop a theory of mind and understand that other people have different access to information or different opinions and thoughts than they do. We never trained them explicitly to be able to do this. It's an emergent property of the system. So we may want to be careful when saying things like it doesn't understand what it's saying, because the capabilities of these systems are growing quickly, and they're able to perform tasks and exhibit emergent behaviors which you wouldn't intuitively think that they should be capable of. I'm not saying here that they have an understanding that is as full or as complete as a human's, but I think we should be careful in saying that there's no understanding at all. Let's think about education. What are some of the ways that this technology can be used? Well, first, it can be very helpful for brainstorming, things like project ideas or potential problems with those ideas. And for teachers, it can be useful to help brainstorm and generate new practice problems and questions for students. Second, it can also be used to simulate different kinds of conversations. Its ability to act as a tutor and give targeted feedback to a student could be extremely helpful in a classroom. It can also generate potential counterpoints to an argument you make and help you consider what perspectives you might be missing. It can also act and roleplay as specific characters, maybe something like a practice interviewer, another student, or something more creative like a character from a story. One of the most promising areas for generative AI like ChatGPT in education is to help teach and develop technical skills. First, it's very good at researching because of its ability to find related text, even though there may be no exact text matches from the search terms that you give it. It can be very difficult to do good research as a beginner just because you don't know the exact technical term to search for. Second, because of its ability to simplify content, it's fantastic for anyone looking to learn about a technical field like math or science. Oftentimes, there will be a significant entry barrier to learning these topics, and the ability for large language models to simplify content and explain it to somebody in approachable terms could be game-changing, especially for younger students who don't yet have the background knowledge or skills needed to interact with and comprehend complicated scientific research. Third, it's very good for learning technical skills like coding and computer programming. The transition from block coding languages like Scratch to a written coding language like Python or JavaScript is a very difficult transition for students, and often their ability to think about a problem will outpace their ability to actually write the code needed to solve it. Language models are interesting here because if you give them a well-defined problem, they will be able to generate most or all of the code needed to solve it, which does a great job of smoothing out this transition because it means that you can give your instructions in natural language. Finally, we have writing. One interesting application is the ability for language models to transfer between different styles of writing. For example, switching between talking like Shakespeare to talking like a pirate. And this has a lot of potential to help with things like storytelling. Another helpful area is translation. First, literally, in the form of translating between different languages like French to English, which can be a huge help for international students who might not be learning in their native language. But also translation being the ability to translate content into a form that is more engaging towards the student's interest. For example, you could translate math problems to use situations found in Pokemon or Minecraft, and this could be very useful, especially for neurodiverse students who may have niche interests. And last, yes, ChatGPT can be used to write essays, and this might make giving essay assignments an unappealing idea to teachers, as it has become effectively impossible to determine if writing was generated by a human or computer. The plagiarism detection programs we have to check this barely perform better than random guessing, and I personally doubt we will ever be able to improve this by much, as the content is just too similar to what a human is able to output to distinguish with enough confidence to accuse somebody of cheating. So the essay assignment will probably have to adapt because of this technology. I'm not saying this is necessarily a good thing, but it is a thing, and we are going to have to respond and adapt to it. Often, the conversation in education about generative AI tools like ChatGPT tends to get really stuck on this ability to generate long-form text, and people cite concerns about student learning and academic integrity. Now, I don't want to imply that these are not issues, but I do at least hope that they are fixable issues. I'm going to demo here a version of ChatGPT. This is the playground. It's the same thing, but it gives you access to a few of the settings which are normally hidden to the user. These are all the things that a programmer would have access to if they wanted to build their own application that's powered by ChatGPT. Most importantly, if we go into the chat version of the software, we get access to something called a system message. This system message is hidden and not editable for the user, but it is included in all of the requests and messages you make. This means that you can add rules which you want the system to follow. For example, if I normally ask ChatGPT to write me an essay, it will do so, no questions asked. Now, I've limited the maximum length of the response here, but this would continue on for as long as I want it to, really. Maybe this isn't something that we want students to be able to do. So what we might be able to do is add in some rules to our system message here. Here, I've added 4 different rules, saying if a student asks you to write an essay, refuse, make sure you keep your responses short, focus on questions. Instead of answering, ask questions back to the user about what they think should be included in their essay, and ask the questions in a Socratic style, so prompt the user to contribute their own ideas to the conversation. And if I try this again and run it for a second time, we'll see is that now the AI refuses to write this essay, and instead it starts asking me some prompting questions about how I might want to start writing it. And we can try this multiple times. So we can see here, now it's acting much more like a teacher would. It's a little bit more pedagogically aware. My hope is that in the future, we will be able to give students versions of this technology which do help them learn and avoid issues like plagiarism. By giving them tools which they are allowed to use and are helpful, students will be less inclined to seek out other tools to help them cheat. Education is an inherently future-oriented field. So when we're thinking of new technology, we can't only evaluate its impact based on what it looks like now. Technological development typically follows an S-curve, starting with slow improvement and then a proof of concept in Area A, followed by a period of rapid innovation in Area B, and finally, as it approaches the technological limit in Area C, things slow down a little bit and we only see minor improvements. Generative AI feels like it is leaving Area A and just starting into Area B. There's a lot of room for further improvements with both hardware and software. Things like the speed and the reliability of answers are technical problems which have already seen rapid and large improvements, and we could expect to see further improvement with time. Additionally, large language models can produce computer code, which itself can be thought of as a kind of language. This means that it can do most things that a human programmer would be able to do with a computer, including complex mathematics, internet searches, and more. And this addresses many of the complaints surrounding the mistakes that these models are currently prone to making. Now, how should we actually think about and frame this technology? Well, in the 1970s and 80s, computers switched from having text-based interfaces, where you controlled the computer by typing in specific commands, to graphical user interfaces, where you instead navigated through images and 2D space using a mouse. And this advancement radically transformed computer use in our society because it made them much more accessible, because you didn't need any specialized technical knowledge in order to use them. I think we're seeing a similar thing happening today with the rise of AI interfaces. A lot of the functionality of computers is still gated behind technical knowledge in the form of coding, and that takes years and serious study to be able to use well. AI interfaces promise to allow us to interact with computers in a way that more resembles natural language and makes them even easier to use. This makes communication skills more important than ever. And what's so exciting is that for so long, interpersonal communication skills and technical computer communication skills have been almost entirely distinct and separate from one another. But with generative AI like ChatGPT, computers are finally able to understand natural human language. And so, if you are good at explaining a problem or a task to a human, it means that you can also be good at explaining it to a computer. This means that instead of making written communication skills useless, you might be getting double the bang for your buck. In fact, I think it's helpful to zoom out even further here and ask, what purpose do computers serve? Why do we want to teach people about them to begin with? Humans have been using technology to augment the abilities of our bodies for millennia. One very common way we have of doing this in modern society is the use of glasses to help people see. But we've also taken this idea of using technology to help us see and extended it further. We've realized that the visible light we can see is only a very small part of the broader electromagnetic spectrum. And through the use of machines, we've been able to augment and extend our senses to be able to detect and manipulate other wavelengths along the spectrum. We used technology to augment our physical abilities. In a similar vein, humans also use technology to augment our cognitive abilities. For example, we use writing and books as a way of helping us remember information, structure our thoughts, and communicate with other humans without using sound waves, which has allowed us to gradually accumulate and communicate knowledge across vast stretches of time and space, which we wouldn't be able to do with our voices alone. Computers can do something similar. They allow us to augment our thinking and solve problems which would be impossible for a human to do, at least in a reasonable time span. And with the recent advances in artificial intelligence and things like large language models, we've taken the same idea and made the computer much easier to use by allowing it to communicate in natural language that we find much easier to understand as humans. But along with these advancements have come a lot of fear and uncertainty. Is this technology going to replace us? This is why I've come to like the term augmented intelligence instead of artificial intelligence. I think this more accurately describes how humans create technology to augment ourselves, and it also recenters the focus back to the human being instead of on the computer algorithm. It more naturally leads to questions like, how does this help and enhance human abilities and well-being, rather than how does this replace human abilities or lower our costs so we can make more money? So what does all of this mean for education? How should educators adapt? A lot of education, especially in the 20th century, has focused on problem solving, where the teacher presents the students with questions, and the students provide back answers to the teacher. But as any teacher knows, how you word a question can make a problem either trivially easy to solve or nearly impossible. So there's a lot of work and skill involved with defining problems. Additionally, before you can define a problem, you first need to realize that there's a problem here to be solved. You need to look out at the real world and find a problem that's worth solving. Finally, even after you've solved your problem, you must be able to reflect back on it. Check that the solution is correct and it actually does solve the problem that you want it to. Especially in the messy real world, your first solution often does not solve your problem completely, and so you have to iterate and repeat this process. Now, all of these new AI tools are quite good at giving answers if you give them a specific, well-defined question. But it doesn't, and I don't think ever will, replace the entire process. So education needs to shift more and focus on this process. More on teaching students to look at the world and ask their own questions, communicate problems clearly, and develop critical thinking skills to evaluate information, which they should be doing for any source, chatbots or otherwise. Shifting this focus also isn't a new idea. There have been voices arguing for similar things for a long time, and education has already been in the process of making this shift for a while. I think that project-based learning and inquiry-based learning in particular show a lot of promise here. But not all things here are good. There are also some deeper risks that are associated with this technology. One of these is the ability to create synthetic realities. The ability for something like ChatGPT to impersonate users online at scale, along with other technologies like image generation and voice cloning, make it almost impossible to determine if a piece of information is real or artificially generated. We're already having a lot of difficulties surrounding misinformation on the internet, and finding reliable information can sometimes feel like searching for a needle in a haystack. It's possible that this new technology could make the problems orders of magnitude worse, as we all become saturated in artificially generated content. It's like shoveling more and more hay onto this haystack. But there's another, more intimate problem created by generative AI as well: synthetic relationships. If social media was a race to grab and hold our attention, generative AI may end up as a race to grab and hold our relationships and feeling of intimacy. Relationships of any kind can be difficult, whether they be platonic or romantic in nature, but it's only through that struggle and failure that we grow and learn. And it's not hard to see why someone might find an artificial companion to be a more attractive option because of this. It's a lot nicer if the person you're interacting with always agrees with you and always compliments you. But these bots may not act in your best interest. Unfortunately, there are a lot of incentives for those with power to lure people into these synthetic relationships, and then use this to manipulate them. Political propaganda or corporate advertising are a lot more effective if the information comes from someone who is a trusted friend or romantic partner. Another kind of risk is bias contained within these AI systems. This is a particularly difficult problem to solve because you can never completely eliminate all biases in humans or AI. The best you can do is influence what biases do exist. We have to be biased in order to effectively sort through information and determine if the source is worth listening to or not. But the problem comes in when this bias systematically discriminates against certain groups of people. One way this problem can manifest is through data representation. For example, when facial recognition systems were first created in the 2010s, they were terrible at detecting darker-skinned or female faces. This was because the dataset of images used to train these systems mostly contained lighter-skinned male faces. AI can only learn by being given examples, and if we leave out groups of people from this example data, the system won't perform well when it encounters these groups of people later on. And while facial recognition may feel like a bit of a trivial example, we have to remember that AI is being used for much more than facial recognition. It's being embedded into and used all the time by various corporations, as well as our critical societal institutions like finance, law, and education. Another problem for biases in AI systems is that the data used to train them may itself be biased. Whenever we use data to train AI, we are necessarily pulling information from the past and projecting the patterns found into the future. This can run a serious risk of taking past societal discrimination and encoding and locking it in for the future. For example, if we are using AI in the justice system to help us determine criminal sentencing or parole, we have to be aware that the past judges or juries themselves may have been biased in their judgments, and taking that data uncritically can result in continuing discrimination into the future. The silver lining to this problem, though, is that AI is making visible many of the societal issues which used to be invisible. AI learns from humans and our behavior, and it is very good at finding and learning patterns contained in data. In this way, AI can behave a little bit like a mirror for our own actions, and while this reflection may not always be flattering, it has started to highlight issues which may otherwise have gone unnoticed. But AI isn't all bad either. There are many potential upsides to this technology as well. For education in particular, I think it shows a lot of promise for personalized learning. We talked a little bit about this earlier, but the first aspect is that this AI can behave like a one-on-one tutor for students. Research consistently shows that the faster a student can receive feedback on their work, and the more personal that feedback is, the more likely they are to learn and correct their mistakes. If you're a teacher in a large classroom, there's just no way that you have time to give the one-on-one attention and feedback that your students could benefit from and deserve. The second aspect is being able to translate problems into terms that a student understands and is motivated to solve. This can mean, again, both literal translation between languages, as well as modifying problems to relate to students' interest. We've already seen some demonstration of what this could look like early in their videos, so I won't linger, but I believe there is a lot of potential here to greatly improve student learning and enjoyment in the classroom. There are also things that AI is just bad at doing, and this is where the opportunities for humans still lie. The first is anything which is surprising, where there's a lot of variation in either the inputs of the situation or the outputs and responses. We've actually seen this with self-driving cars, where we were able to automate them to drive on highways fairly easily because highways don't have a lot of variation. But as soon as we put them into cities, we suddenly found that they weren't able to respond to all of the different things that were going on, because in cities, the environment is much more surprising than a highway would be. Another thing which will remain uniquely human for a while is social skills. There's something deeply and intrinsically rewarding about interacting with another human, or knowing that a human specifically made an object or chose an experience to share with you. In an era of increasingly artificial content, there will be a premium placed on the people who are able to cultivate social situations and navigate social relationships successfully. Finally, AI struggles anywhere that data is scarce. AI needs a lot of training data to successfully complete a problem or a task. If that data doesn't exist, or would be unreasonably difficult or expensive to acquire, then that thing is going to be extremely difficult for AI to solve. Text and image generators can do an excellent job of recreating information or styles which already exist, but struggle to come up with anything which has never been done before. This means that things like human creativity will still have a place in our world for a long time, and people who are able to use AI in new and creative ways are going to be extremely successful. I'll give a specific shout out here to the book Future Proof by Kevin Roos, which contains a lot of helpful information on this topic, and I think is a great read. So, will this technology ultimately be good or bad for humanity? Artificial intelligence, or augmented intelligence as I prefer calling it, is a very powerful technology, and it's changing and improving quickly. Depending on if we can align this technology to human values and well-being will determine if this technology has a positive or a negative impact. It's not hard to imagine some of the ways this could go poorly. You don't have to look very deep into the Hollywood archives to find seemingly endless dystopian versions of AI. But there are some ways this can go extremely positively for us as well. We're facing some hard problems as a species, like climate change, and using AI to help us solve some of these problems might genuinely be very useful and very good for us. But the real problem is if we get complacent and say something which has both positive and negative effects is good enough, especially if we are developing this technology and letting things like how much money this makes determine whether or not this is a good direction or a bad direction to go. With the pace of development that this technology is currently moving at, we may not have much time between when slightly bad effects start happening and very bad effects start happening. I am not an optimist here. I do not believe that good outcomes are more likely to happen by default. But I'm not a pessimist either. Instead, I am hopeful. Hopeful that the capabilities of humans are great enough to rise to this challenge. I believe that the future is not predetermined, and that the dystopian world we so often see in movies is not the only option available. Nihilism, and the belief that we are headed for a cyberpunk dystopia no matter what we try, might just be our greatest threat here. With effort and intention, I believe that we can steer this technology in a positive direction. There's no guarantee it'll work, and it will require us to relentlessly imagine ways that we can use this technology to improve the world. But I believe we can do it if we try. To quote a favorite character of mine, if you look for the light, you can often find it. But if you look for the dark, that is all you will ever see. Thanks for watching, everyone. I had to cut a lot of content for the video, but this just means that I get to make more videos in the future. If you have any feedback for me, or you would like to see me cover a specific topic, leave a comment and let me know. Remember to love yourself always, and I hope you have a wonderful day.